Hello everyone, we are continuing with our series titled The I Am Sayings of Jesus. And this is video number 2 in this series. In the Gospel of John, Jesus has made several statements like I am the bread of life, I am the way, the truth, and the life, I am the resurrection and the life, and several other statements which begin with I am. And therefore, these are called as the I am statements of Jesus. In this video, we are going to look at John chapter 8, verse 12, where Jesus makes a similar claim for himself. We read like this: When Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Throughout John's Gospel, especially through these I am sayings, Jesus is using simple words, simple concepts to speak of deep and profound truths that would affect all of humanity. And in this particular verse, Jesus is claiming to be the light of the world. Now, this video is divided into 3 sections. In section 1, we are going to focus on the context of John's Gospel chapters 7 and 8, in which Jesus is making the statement. The context is very important in our understanding what exactly Jesus means when he says, I am the light of the world. In section 2, we are going to focus on 3 claims that Jesus is making about himself when he said, I am the light of the world. And in section 3, we are going to talk about different kinds of darknesses in the human mind, in the human heart, and the consequences of those darknesses. And we're going to discuss how Jesus, as the light, comes into our dark situations and can change us completely upside down. So let's begin with section 1, where we are going to talk about the context of this particular passage. John's Gospel, chapters 7 and 8, are talking about Jesus in the temple during the celebration of the Feast of the Tabernacles, or the Feast of the Tents. Every year, the Jewish people had several festivals they would celebrate as a community. And some of these festivals were celebrated by their coming to Jerusalem, where they would celebrate it together. The Feast of Tabernacles, or the Feast of Tents, was a time when the Jewish people would come to the city of Jerusalem and they would erect temporary tents for themselves, and they would stay in those tents for almost a week and celebrate the faithfulness of God, the provision of God that God had shown to their ancestors several hundred years ago. Remember, there was a time when the people of Israel were rescued from the land of Egypt, and before they entered into the promised land, they wandered in the desert for almost 40 years. And during those 40 years, God provided them with manna from heaven, God provided them with food, God provided them with water, God provided them with safety and security. God was also providing them with his presence in the form of a pillar of cloud during the day and a pillar of fire by night. And so the Feast of Tabernacles was something that the Israelites celebrated every year in order to remember these 40 years when the people of God were provided for, protected by God in the desert. Now, when Jesus is in the temple, he is watching all the drama and all these things that are going on, the celebrations that are going on around Jerusalem. And here is someone who has provided these people, their ancestors, with food in the desert and with water in the desert, with his presence in the desert, with the light in the desert, and so on. And these people have not really recognized who Jesus is. Now, during this celebration, there was something that took place at the temple, which could be called as the illumination of the temple. In the temple, at a particular place, there would be 4 pillars that would be erected, And on each of these four pillars, there would be four bowls, large bowls, and these pillars and these bowls could be reached by ladders. And each of these bowls would be filled with oil, and the old clothes of priests would be used as wicks, and they were lighted during the evenings and the nights. And when these 16 bowls on these four pillars were lighted, the light could be seen from all across Jerusalem. Now, why was this done? Remember, this is the celebration of the Feast of the Tabernacles. They're remembering the 40 years in the desert, and therefore, when in the night these pillars and these bowls and these wicks would be lit up, it would be like a pillar of fire for all the people around Jerusalem, and they were reminding themselves of how God provided light to all the people in the desert. So Jesus is looking at all of these. He knew the purposes and the meanings of the Feast of the Tabernacles. And when they were celebrating the light that God had given their ancestors for almost 40 years, hundreds of years ago, Jesus presents himself as the light of the world. Remember, the Feast of Tabernacles, when this light was being celebrated, it was a temporary arrangement. And only people in Jerusalem could see this light, and only a few people could see that. But here is someone who has created the vast expanses of the universe by the power of his word, and he is standing amongst them, and he is telling them that I am the light. Now, Jesus does not say that he is the light of the temple, nor does he say that I am the light for Jerusalem, or nor does he limit himself as the light for Israel. He says, I am the light of the entire world. Now, that's the context in which Jesus is making this statement, the Feast of the Tabernacles, when Jesus introduces himself as the light of the world. Now, with that, we move into section 2, where we are going to look at 3 claims that Jesus is making about himself when he says, I am the light of the world. Number 1, Jesus is saying to these people that he is God himself. Because in the Old Testament, several times we are told that God is light. Let me bring 2 passages to our attention. The first one is from the book of Psalms, chapter 27, verse 1, where the psalmist says, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? So who is called light here? The Lord, Jehovah. The God is called as the light here in Psalm 27 verse 1. Isaiah chapter 60 verse 19 reads like this, the Lord will be your everlasting light. In other words, in the Old Testament, God is the one who is the source of light. He is the one who is the provider of light. In fact, he is light himself. And so, when Jesus in John's Gospel chapter 8 is calling himself as the light of the world, the first claim that he is making for himself is that he is God, that he is equal to Jehovah. The second claim that Jesus is making when he says that I am the light of the world is that he is the Messiah who was promised in the Old Testament. Actually, I could bring you 2 or 3 passages from the book of Isaiah, Isaiah chapter 9, Isaiah chapter 42, and so on, to prove that the coming Messiah was to provide light for all the people. But I would take our attention to Isaiah chapter 49 and read verses 5 and 6, where it's said about the Messiah. And now the Lord says, he who formed me in the womb to be his servant, to bring Jacob back to him and gather Israel to himself. For I am honored in the eyes of the Lord, and my God has been my strength. He says, it is too small a thing for you to be my servant, to restore the tribes of Jacob and bring back those of Israel I have kept. I will also make you a light for the Gentiles, that you may bring my salvation to the ends of the earth. So God the Father is speaking to the Messiah, and he is saying, it is a small thing for you to bring back the people of Israel into my presence. I want you to be a light for all the Gentiles, so that the salvation that I have would be taken to the ends of the earth. And so the coming Messiah was said to be a light for the Jews and a light for the Gentiles. And so when Jesus is saying that I am the light of the world, Jesus is saying that he is the Messiah that was promised in the Old Testament. Claim number 3 that Jesus makes when he says that I am the light of the world is that he is the only and unique provider of this light. Jesus is not saying that I am one light among many lights. He is not saying that I am a light of the world. He says I am the light of the world, meaning that he is the only one who can remove the darknesses in which human beings are and bring them into light. And with that, we close section 2 and we enter into section 3, where we are going to talk about the darknesses in the human mind, in the human heart, and the consequences of those darknesses, and how Jesus, as the provider of light, as the light of the world, is going to push back these darknesses and bring light into the life of the human being. Remember that the people of Israel were at that time celebrating God's presence among their ancestors in the form of a pillar of fire. And Jesus is saying that he is going to be the light of the world, and that whoever would walk after him would never walk in darkness, but they would enter into light, they would enter into life. Now, when human beings walk on this planet Earth, they go through different kinds of darknesses. There is the darkness of falsehood. There is the darkness of ignorance. There is the darkness of impurity. There is the darkness of sorrow. There is the darkness of death. To all these darknesses, Jesus, when he claims to be light, he is saying that he is the light of truth, in contrast to the darkness of falsehood. When Jesus claims to be the light of the world, he is saying he is the light of wisdom, in contrast to the darkness of ignorance. When Jesus claims to be the light, he is saying that he is the light of holiness, in contrast to the darkness of unholiness, of impurity. When Jesus claims to be the light of the world, he is claiming to be the light of joy, in contrast to the darkness of sorrow. When Jesus claims to be the light, he is saying that he is the light of life, in contrast to the darkness of death. In other words, if human beings are in the darkness of either ignorance or sorrow or impurity or any of those kinds of things, Jesus is the one who can usher them into the light of life, into the light of purity, and so on. And so Jesus is telling people, follow me, I am the light of the world. He is telling the people that he is able to rescue them from the darkness of sin, the darkness of guilt, the darkness of shame, and so on. Now let me talk to us a little bit about physical darkness and its consequences on man. You know, physical darkness can instill fear in the human heart, but physical light can remove that darkness and remove that fear as well. Physical darkness can sometimes equal physical blindness. If you are in a completely dark place, it's like almost you are blind and you cannot move around. And physical light can remove that physical blindness. Do you know that physical blindness can sometimes, or darkness can sometimes bring bondage and immobility? You know, when the 10 plagues were sent upon the Egyptians, there was a time when darkness was sent upon the Egyptians, and the darkness was so heavy that we are told that everybody stayed in the same place that they were and they could not move. It caused immobility and bondage. Do you know that physical darkness can even kill? Scientists tell us that if there was no sun, if there was no light, then plants would not be able to prepare their own food and they would quickly die, because sunlight or light is essential to the life of plants and even animals and human beings. And so light is the giver of life. Now, just like these physical darknesses have effects on human beings, you have parallel spiritual darknesses that also have consequences on the human mind. For example, just like physical darkness can bring in fear into the human heart, spiritual darkness can also bring in fear into a human being. And it is the spiritual light that can take away that spiritual darkness and the fear that comes as a consequence of it. Just like physical darkness can bring in physical blindness, spiritual darkness can bring in spiritual blindness, and this blindness can be removed only by spiritual light. Similarly, spiritual darkness can bring spiritual bondage and spiritual immobility, and spiritual light can bring in spiritual freedom into the lives of people. And just like physical darkness can kill plants, spiritual darkness can kill human beings, and it is spiritual light that can bring in life into the lives of the people. And so spiritual darkness can bring helplessness and hopelessness into the lives of people. And spiritual light means spiritual help and spiritual hopefulness. And therefore, in a dark world, in a context where people go through dark situations of life, Jesus introduces himself as the light of the world. And he says, if anyone follows me, he will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Now, even the people that were celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles and were celebrating the provision of light to their ancestors through the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire, they were not really able to recognize who Jesus was. And so Jesus has to introduce himself as the one who provides the light for the world. Do you know that John's Gospel, chapter 3, tells us that light has come into the world, but there are certain people who would oppose this light, would not receive this light because their deeds are deeds of darkness, and therefore they prefer darkness over light. John chapter 3, verses 19 through 21, we read like this. This is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but people loved darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed. But whoever lives by the truth comes into the light so that it may be seen plainly that what they have done has been done in the sight of God. So even though light has come into this world, we are told by Jesus himself in John 3 that some people will not accept this light. They would rather prefer to live in darkness because their deeds are deeds of darkness. So if you are a person who is listening to me and is hearing about Jesus for the first time, or you are in a place which is dark and you want to see light, I want to introduce you to the person who calls himself the light of the world. Jesus is the one who can rescue us from all the dark situations of our life and can usher us into the light of life. And to those of us who are Christians, I think there is one or two applications for us as well. Number one, in the book of Peter, the letter that Peter writes, Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9, that we are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that we may declare the praises of him who has called us out of darkness into his wonderful light. So responsibility number one of people who have already come into this marvelous light is to witness to this light, is to speak about this light, is to sing and praise about this light, and to talk to other people about this light. And that's responsibility number one for Christians who already know Jesus as the light of the world. And responsibility number two for Christians is that we are also called to be light in this world. Not because we have light of our own, but because we are called to reflect the light that God is providing us. Just like the moon reflects the light of the sun during the night, so also we are called to reflect the light of the world, Jesus himself, by being lights in a difficult world. And therefore, we are called to the responsibility of testifying to this marvelous light. And we are also called to the responsibility of providing light to the people that are already in darkness. John chapter 8, verse 12, let me read that again. Jesus said, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." Jesus says that he is the light of this world. Let him be our light. Moment by moment, minute by minute, day by day, may he be the one who leads us and guides us. May his word be a lamp unto our feet and a guide unto our path. He is the light of the world. Thank you.